At 2 a.m., he was just a maintenance man fixing a broken light in a quiet hotel lobby. He never expected anyone to be awake, let alone her. But when the woman in a robe whispered something he hadn't heard in years, his world shifted, and so did hers. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about unexpected connections and quiet moments that change everything, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the end. Now, let's begin. Single Dad was fixing lobby lights at 2 a.m. Then a woman in a robe whispered, "You're so handsome." The lobby lights had been flickering for 3 days straight, and it was finally driving Gabe Carter crazy. He stood alone on the creaky stepladder, squinting at the old fixture while the storm outside howled like a living thing. Snow lashed against the wide lobby windows of the Pine Haven Mountain Resort, a luxury retreat nestled in the Colorado Highlands. Most guests were asleep by now, at least the ones who could sleep. Gabe tightened a bolt with his gloved fingers and sighed. He'd just finished a 10-hour shift clearing snow and salting walkways. But the lights were out again, and when you were the only maintenance man on duty at 2 a.m., there was no passing the buck. His back ached, his boots were still damp, and he hadn't had more than 5 hours of sleep in 2 days. But Gabe wasn't one to complain. He had bigger things on his mind, like whether Eli's new medication would hold through the next cold snap, or if he could stretch the week's grocery budget another day. He reached into his toolbox, grabbed a fresh fuse, and muttered, "Let's try this again." Just then, he heard it soft footsteps against marble. He paused. No one should have been up. Housekeeping ended their shift at midnight. Reception was unmanned at this hour, and security had checked in 15 minutes ago. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate. Then stopped. Gabe slowly turned his head toward the hallway. And there she was. A woman stood near the base of the grand staircase, framed by the soft glow of a wall sconce. Her robe was silk ivory and fell just past her knees. Barefoot, her long, dark hair was pulled back loosely like she'd stepped out of sleep or a dream. Her eyes locked on his, unreadable at first. Then something flickered in them. Recognition. Desperation. "You're really handsome," she said. Gabe blinked, nearly dropping the fuse. The silence after her words was thick enough to choke on. He stepped off the ladder, carefully placing both feet on the ground before answering. "Ma'am, I think you might be—" "I'm not drunk," she said quickly, her voice calm but tense, like someone trying very hard not to break. "I know what time it is, and I know what I'm doing." He set his tools down, slowly, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. Years of being a single father had taught him how to read situations fast, especially when someone was on the verge of unraveling. "All right," he said gently. "Then maybe you'd like to sit down. The fire's still warm." She looked at the stone hearth across the room but didn't move. "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. "Yes." "One." She nodded to herself as if that confirmed something. "Then maybe you'll understand why I'm about to do something insane." Gabe gave her a careful, patient look. "Try me." She stepped closer, just enough for him to see the faint shimmer of tears in her eyes. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." Gabe stared at her, waiting for a punchline. It didn't come. "Look," she said, folding her arms tightly across her chest as if to hold herself together. "You probably think I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But I'm supposed to fly to New York in the morning and announce my engagement to a man I don't love in front of my entire family and every shareholder in our company. I don't want to marry him. I never did." Gabe didn't move. He studied her. Not just her appearance, but her tone, her posture. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dare. It was a last-ditch act of defiance one whispered in the middle of the night to a stranger in work boots. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Because you look like someone who won't lie just to impress me. And because you were the only man working in this entire resort at 2 a.m. fixing a broken light without asking for thanks. That says something. That I need the paycheck. That you have pride in what you do. And maybe you know what it's like to feel trapped." He didn't answer. She stepped even closer now, her voice lower. "I'll pay you. Generously. Just pretend to be my fiancé for a few days. Enough to convince my father and the board that I've made my own choice. Then you can go back to your life. Clean break." Gabe looked down, processing. He wasn't some wandering grifter looking to play games. He had responsibilities. Eli. His job. His quiet, hidden life. But the desperation in her voice wasn't fake, and neither was the fear behind her eyes. He exhaled slowly. "You don't even know my name." She straightened her posture, extending a hand with crisp boardroom poise. "Clarice Monroe, acting CEO of Monroe Holdings. And you are Gabe," raised an eyebrow, shaking her hand with a firm grip. "Gabe Carter, maintenance guy, snow shoveler, and apparently fiancé for hire." A half smile broke across her lips, almost surprised she could still manage one. "Then I guess this is where our engagement begins." Somewhere down the hall a clock chimed softly. It was 2:11 a.m., and everything had just changed. Clarice sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the resort's reading lounge, her robe now covered by a borrowed gray cardigan Gabe had handed her without a word. The fire behind her crackled quietly, the flames softening the edges of her tension. She clutched a porcelain mug of peppermint tea, though she hadn't taken a single sip. Gabe leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, his blue maintenance jacket still zipped to the collar. His toolbox sat beside the hearth, forgotten for now. He had questions too many, but none he could ask without breaking whatever fragile state held her together. "This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go," Clarice said, her voice thinner than before. "I was going to take a walk, clear my head. I didn't expect to find you." Gabe arched an eyebrow. "You sound disappointed." "No," she said quickly, almost defensively. "Not disappointed, just surprised. You didn't ask questions." "Most people do." He shrugged. "You didn't look like someone who wanted to be interrogated." That drew the smallest smile from her. "You're right. I didn't." Gabe took a slow breath, then stepped closer. "Look, Clarice Miss Monroe, whatever this is, I'm not the guy for it. I'm just trying to keep my son healthy and a roof over our heads." Her eyes met his sharply at the mention of his son. "You said his name was Eli, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, 10 years old. Asthma. Smart enough to know when I'm lying and kind enough to pretend he believes me anyway." Something in Clarice's face cracked. Her gaze dropped to her lap. "That's the thing about kids, isn't it? They see straight through us." Gabe softened. "What happened, Clarice? What brought you out here in the middle of a storm, hiding from a life most people would trade everything for?" She looked up. "Control. That's what it's all about. My father's empire runs on it. Controlled assets, controlled narratives, controlled people, including me." She stood and walked slowly toward the window, her figure silhouetted against the falling snow. "I was a straight A student. Got my MBA by 23. Took over regional strategy by 25. I've never missed a quarterly goal. But none of that matters to my father unless I also marry Henry Fields, the son of his oldest investor." Gabe stayed quiet. There was no judgment in his expression, just calm listening. Clarice continued. "They planned the whole thing, even the proposal. I was just a guest at my own life." A long silence followed. "And now you want me to be your ticket out?" Gabe asked quietly. Clarice turned. "Not out. Just a detour. Long enough for me to make my own decisions, not ones inherited from boardroom deals." He studied her for a long moment. "You're asking a stranger to stand beside you in front of people who can smell weakness from across a conference table." She straightened, her jaw tightening. "I don't think you're weak. That's not the point." She stepped closer. "I saw the way you spoke to me. The way you didn't rush, didn't posture. That's rare where I come from." Gabe hesitated. "This isn't just about me. If I go with you, I'll be gone for days. I'd have to leave Eli with my neighbor Annie. She's reliable, but he's had 2 attacks this month already. Clarice didn't hesitate. I'll pay for his medication. For private care while you're gone. I'll make sure he's safe. You have my word. He let out a slow breath. Her offer was tempting, too tempting. And dangerous. His gut twisted with the weight of it. But then he remembered Eli's last ER visit, the fear in his son's eyes as the oxygen mask came down, the rising cost of prescriptions, the maintenance bills he hadn't opened yet. "You'd do that?" he asked. "Even if I say no later?" "Yes." That was the moment he knew she wasn't bluffing. There was no agenda in her voice, just exhaustion and a kind of battered honesty he respected. "I have conditions," he said. She blinked. "Name them." "1, no lying to Eli. If he asks, I tell him the truth. 2, you don't make me wear a tux unless it's absolutely necessary." Clarice smiled, a real one this time. "Deal." And 3. He paused, staring at her intently. "If this gets messy, and it will, you don't let me become your shield. I won't be someone you use to hurt your father." She met his gaze evenly. "I don't want to hurt him. I just want him to see me." Something about the way she said it settled the decision in his gut. Gabe exhaled through his nose. "All right then, Miss Monroe. Let's ruin a few expectations together." Clarice extended her hand again, this time firmer, more certain. "Let's." They shook. From the hallway, a digital clock blinked 3:01 a.m. in red. Outside, the storm began to ease, and inside, 2 strangers sealed a pact that would upend both their lives, one born not of ambition or romance, but of something rarer, mutual recognition in a world that rarely noticed people like them. The first thing Gabe noticed when they landed in New York wasn't the icy wind slicing between the glass towers, it was the way Clarice Monroe walked. She moved like a woman carrying a sword no one else could see. Every step down the jetway, every nod to passing assistants, every flick of her gaze was purposeful, controlled, regal, and completely unlike the woman who had whispered desperation through chattering teeth just 48 hours earlier. Gabe kept close, his boots still dusted with the Colorado snow he hadn't quite brushed off. He'd worn his best clothes jeans without holes and a gray blazer Clarice had bought him for optics, but he still felt like someone walking into the wrong room at the wrong time. Their black town car glided through midtown traffic, cutting past honking cabs and LED billboards flashing with stock tickers and perfume ads. Gabe sat stiffly beside her, watching her eyes scan through documents on a sleek tablet. "Where are we going now?" he asked, trying not to sound like a hostage. Clarice didn't look up. "First, the penthouse. You'll meet Rosalind, my executive assistant. She'll brief you on the cover story. Then we'll change and go to the gallery opening. My father will be there. Henry, too." Gabe frowned. "We're doing all that today." She finally turned toward him. "The faster we go public, the harder it is for them to unravel." There was a pause. "And you'll need to act like you're used to this." This, Gabe said, glancing around the car's interior, feels a bit like pretending to breathe on Mars. Clarice smirked. "Then, hold your breath. You'll be fine." The penthouse was everything Gabe expected and nothing he'd ever imagined, living in polished floors, glass walls, art so abstract he wasn't sure which way was up. Eli would have called it a spaceship full of really nervous furniture. Rosalind, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, approached Gabe with a nod of acknowledgement, then handed him a sleek folder. "Your bio," she said curtly. "You've been in Clarissa's life for 6 months. You met in a charity function in Aspen. You share values, not status. You're private, steady protective. She finds your authenticity refreshing. You adore her. You want to marry her." Gabe raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's a lot of feeling for 6 months." Rosalind didn't blink. "That's Manhattan." Clarice disappeared into another room to change, leaving Gabe with a suit bag, a tie he didn't know how to tie, and 23 minutes to become the man she needed. By the time they stepped out of the car at the gallery, Gabe was transformed, or at least camouflaged. The space was flooded with people in tailored suits and glittering dresses, each holding champagne flutes and expressions of curated boredom. A modern jazz quartet hummed quietly in the corner. Spotlights reflected off glass and brushed metal, casting soft glows on the guests' faces. Clarice slid her arm through his, pulling him close. Her perfume was subtle lavender and something woodsy. "You ready?" she murmured. "No," Gabe said honestly. She smiled. "Good. That means you won't overplay it." They moved through the crowd like a current. People turned curious. Whispers followed. Then came the flash. And another. A journalist called her name. "Clarice, over here, is that your fiancé?" She turned without missing a beat, pressing Gabe's hand against her waist like they'd done it 1,000 times. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and clear. "This is Gabe Carter. We're engaged." The room rippled. Some smiles turned tight. Others raised glasses in polite confusion. Then a voice cut through like a knife. "Well, isn't this unexpected?" Clarice tensed. Gabe turned. Henry Fields. Slick, tall, and dressed in navy wool. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I thought you were still considering our father's merger," Henry said. "Now you're announcing engagements." Clarice didn't flinch. Some deals fall through. Others turn out to be better investments. Henry glanced at Gabe. "And this is the upgrade." Gabe smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes either. "I'm just the man who answers when she stops pretending." Clarice blinked just once, but it was enough. The heat in her cheeks wasn't embarrassment. It was something else, something she hadn't expected from a stranger in work boots. Henry studied Gabe a moment longer, then leaned in toward Clarice. "This won't last," he whispered. "Your father will never allow it." Clarice answered in a whisper of her own. "Then he's about to find out how much I've grown." Henry walked off. The crowd slowly returned to its usual buzz. Clarice and Gabe stood together under the lights, their connection half imagined, but now dangerously close to real. Gabe leaned close. "You all right?" She took a slow breath, eyes still on Henry's back. "I wasn't until you said that." He tilted his head. "Which part?" "The part about me not pretending. I haven't heard anyone talk to me like that in years. Not like I'm some asset to manage." Her eyes met his vulnerable again. "Thanks, Gabe, for showing up tonight." He gave a quiet nod. "Just promise me you'll tell me when it stops being pretend." Her smile was faint. "I think I'll know when it does." The cameras kept flashing. The city kept spinning. But something had shifted between them, something subtle and fragile and real beneath all the practiced smiles and polished lies. And for the first time in a very long time, Clarice Monroe didn't feel like she was acting. Clarice woke the next morning in her penthouse bedroom with the strange sense that her world had shifted, and not in the way she expected. Outside the enormous windows, the city pulsed to life beneath a slate-gray sky horns echoing like a hymn to motion. But inside, it was oddly quiet. She sat up, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. Gabe had slept in the guest room, he'd insisted, and though it was all for show, a part of her had felt something tighten when she watched him walk away down the hallway last night. Not attraction. Not yet. Just a recognition of something. Grounded. Authenticity. She wasn't used to it. Certainly not from men in her world. In the kitchen, she found him already dressed jeans, a clean Henley sleeves, pushed up barefoot, flipping pancakes like it was second nature. Eli would have adored him. "Morning," Gabe said casually, not looking up from the skillet. She blinked. "You cook?" He shrugged. "I parent. Cooking comes with the job." She walked to the counter, watching him pour a fresh cup of coffee and slide it across to her without asking. It was exactly how she took it. No sugar splash of oat milk. "How'd you know?" she asked, surprised. Gabe smirked. "I have eyes. You used that milk 3 times yesterday and never touched the sugar jar." She smiled into her cup. Observant. Occupational hazard. Fixing things means you have to notice what's broken first. Clara studied him for a moment. There was something in his tone, not pride, but presence. Gabe had the kind of stillness that made other people settle without realizing it. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. He glanced over. "Miss what?" "The boardrooms. The strategy. Your old life." He paused before answering, then set the pan aside. "Not really. I miss being good at something that mattered, but not the world I had to live in to be there." Clarice tilted her head. "You were good." Gabe met her eyes. "I was very good." She let that settle for a beat. "So why walk away?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Because my wife got sick. And I realized no one in that world knew how to hold space for grief. They saw weakness as a liability. I didn't want to be part of a place where you have to hide your humanity to survive." Clarice felt something lurch in her chest. She lowered her cup. "I'm sorry." Gabe gave a half smile. "You don't have to be. I got Eli out of it. And a quieter life, it's enough." But the way he said enough told her it wasn't. "Not really." Later that afternoon, Clarice and Gabe entered the conference wing of Monroe Holdings. The building rose 50 stories above Fifth Avenue, a glass and steel tribute to power. Gabe didn't speak as they rode the elevator, but she saw him watching everything: entry badges, exit paths, digital security panels. He was scanning, calculating. Clarice leaned closer. "You're analyzing this like a battlefield." He gave her a wry glance. "In corporate strategy, it usually is." The elevator doors opened, revealing the executive floor. Waiting for them was her father, Douglas Monroe. Douglas had the air of a lion gone silver. Trim suit, polished shoes, eyes like granite. He was flanked by Henry Fields and 3 senior board members. "Clarice," he said evenly, "I didn't expect you back so soon." "I wanted to introduce someone," she said calmly. "This is Gabe Carter." Gabe extended a hand. "Pleasure, Mr. Monroe." Douglas looked him up and down with the precision of a man appraising market risk. "Your background," Gabe didn't flinch. "Small business consultant, former partner at Crane Bennett Strategy Group. I left 5 years ago. Currently working independently, mostly by choice." Henry laughed under his breath. "That's one way to say unemployed." Gabe turned to him. "Unemployed implies no work. I raise a 10-year-old, manage full maintenance operations at Pine Haven Resort, and apparently now serve as an emotional decoy for a corporate princess. I'd say that's 3 jobs in one." Silence fell. Clarice's breath hitched. Then, surprisingly, Douglas chuckled. Just once, but it echoed. "I like him," Douglas said. "He's got bite." Clarice blinked. Henry's face darkened but said nothing. After the meeting, as they waited for the elevator, Clarice turned to Gabe. "You didn't have to push back that hard." "Yes, I did," he replied simply. She hesitated. "Why?" "Because this world eats people alive. You need someone next to you who won't be devoured. I can't be your shield if I fold at the first sign of condescension." Clarice swallowed hard. "You're not just playing anymore, are you?" Gabe's expression softened. "I never was." "Not completely." That evening, back at the penthouse, Clarice poured herself a glass of wine and stared out over the city lights. For the first time in years, she wasn't dreading the next morning. Wasn't plotting the next move like a chess game she was destined to lose. She was thinking of pancakes, of 10-year-old boys and quiet bravery, of a man who fixed things not just with tools, but with words. And she wondered what it meant when the lines between pretend and real began to blur, and why the idea didn't scare her as much as it should have. The next few days unfolded like a beautifully rehearsed play. Clarice and Gabe moved through meetings, dinners, and curated appearances with synchronized precision. The press was enchanted. The grounded self-made fiancé was a narrative the tabloids couldn't resist, and Clarice's image surged in public favor. But behind closed doors, the performance grew increasingly complicated. Gabe wasn't supposed to fit into her world so seamlessly. He wasn't supposed to remember everyone's names in the boardroom, or quietly hand her a pen during a negotiation when she was fumbling with nerves. He wasn't supposed to speak up once, and then sit back and listen like he was studying her not to gain leverage but to understand her. He wasn't supposed to make her feel seen, and worst of all, he wasn't supposed to make her feel safe. One night after a charity event hosted at the Met, Clarice and Gabe returned to the penthouse later than usual. The car ride had been quiet but not in a tense way. More like two people who had grown used to silence not being awkward. She changed into a soft gray sweater and poured herself a cup of tea, while Gabe disappeared into the guest room. But when she walked past Eli's room, the one Gabe had temporarily set up with pictures and books she'd never noticed before she paused. The lights were off, but the door was cracked. Inside, Gabe was sitting on the edge of the bed, softly reading a story out loud. Clarice leaned against the doorframe, her heart catching in her throat. And the little engine said, "I think I can. I think I can." And he pulled the others up the hill. Gabe read his voice calm and warm. Then he looked up, catching her watching. "Sorry," he said with a quiet smile. "I know he's not here, but it helps me feel close to him." Clarice walked in and sat on the floor beside the bed. "You do that every night?" Gabe nodded. "I used to read to him from the hospital when I was out of town. Now I just do it from wherever I am, even if he's not listening. It keeps me grounded." Clarice looked at the small collection of worn children's books on the nightstand. "Your son's lucky. I'm the lucky one." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said softly. Gabe nodded. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're okay?" He exhaled slowly. "All the time. But I made peace with the idea that I'm allowed to carry pain and still keep going. They're not mutually exclusive." Clarice swallowed. "I've never known how to do that. You've been taught to compartmentalize. Most people in your position have. But that kind of life, it costs you." She looked at him. "What did it cost you?" He hesitated. "My marriage. Not because I didn't love her, but because I was too busy trying to fix everything that was breaking around her. I stopped just being there." Clarice's throat tightened. "And now I try to show up for real, even when it's hard, even when I'm scared." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That sounds exhausting." Gabe smiled gently. "It is. But it's also the only thing that ever made me feel human again." Clarice looked away, blinking quickly. Something sharp and unspoken was shifting inside her chest. A kind of ache that had nothing to do with longing and everything to do with finally understanding what she'd been missing all these years. Connection. Not the performative kind. Not the kind bound by status or mutual benefit. But the raw, unpolished, deeply present kind. She stood brushing invisible dust from her jeans. "Gabe." He looked up. "When this is over, when the performance ends, I don't know if I'll be ready to let you go." The words hung in the air, terrifying in their honesty. Gabe stood slowly. There was a gentleness in his expression, but no pretense. "Clarice, we're walking a very thin line here. I know, this started out as a lie, but it's not all a lie anymore. Is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said very quietly, "I don't know what it is. I just know it's real." And then, just as naturally as a breath, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips lingered, not to seduce, but to stay to say, "I see you, even when you're not trying to be seen." Clarice's eyes closed for half a second, the warmth of the moment washing over her like sunlight breaking through clouded glass. But before she could speak again, a sharp chime cut through the room. Her phone. She walked over and picked it up, heart-pounding. The screen read, "Father, 3, missed calls." She swallowed and answered. Dad, Douglas Monroe's voice came through cold and sharp. "You need to turn on the news." Clarice turned toward the TV and grabbed the remote. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. A photo of Gabe shirtless working on a broken pipe outside the resort in Colorado. The headline beneath it screamed, "Clarice Monroe's Fiancé Fraud," or "Fortune Hunter." Her breath caught. Gabe walked over slowly, watching the same screen. She turned to him, dread coiling in her stomach. "They found you." He nodded once. "And they're just getting started." The warmth of the moment shattered like glass beneath a high heel. And just like that, the beautiful lie they'd been living began to teeter on the edge of something dangerously real and publicly unraveling. The headlines didn't stop. By noon, every media outlet from Wall Street Journal to gossip blogs had picked up the story: Clarice Monroe's mystery fiancé, a single dad with a secret past. Photos of Gabe fixing pipes, shoveling snow, and even walking with a paper bag of groceries circulated with brutal speed. They framed him as a fraud, an opportunist. Some painted him as romanticized working-class charm. Others whispered gold digger. But the truth was far more complicated and far more human. Clarice stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, staring at the skyline as her phone buzzed relentlessly on her desk behind her. She hadn't spoken to Gabe all morning. He'd left early to clear his head, said he needed air. But she could still feel the ghost of his presence, the way his quiet steadiness had become part of the air she breathed. Douglas Monroe's voice echoed from her last conversation with him. "You've jeopardized your entire position for a man you barely know." But she did know Gabe. She knew how he brewed coffee exactly 7 minutes after waking up, how he checked the air filters in her penthouse without asking, how he spoke to her like she was a person, not an asset. That kind of knowing didn't need years, it needed honesty. And Gabe had given her nothing but that. The door burst open without a knock. Rosalind entered, tablet in hand, lips pursed. "I've contained the damage as best I can. PR is working on a statement. Your father wants you in the boardroom in 30. Clarice turned. "What kind of statement?" "That this was all a misunderstanding. That you and Mr. Carter had a brief romance, but you've ended the engagement." Gracefully. Clarice's pulse throbbed in her neck. "That's not true." Rosalind's expression didn't change. Truth stopped mattering the minute his photo hit the tabloids. Clarice crossed her arms. "I won't lie. Not for the board. Not for my father." "Then, you're going to lose your seat." The words landed like a slap. Not because they were unexpected, but because they no longer terrified her the way they once did. "I appreciate your loyalty, Rosalind," she said, voice steady. "But I didn't fight this hard to finally have a voice, only to use it repeating someone else's script." Rosalind looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a rare show of softness, she said, "Be careful. The board isn't kind to women who bleed publicly." Clarice gave a half-smile. "Then maybe it's time they see what bleeding with dignity looks like." Meanwhile, Gabe was across the city walking the quiet pathways of Central Park. The snow had started to melt, leaving patches of wet earth and gravel exposed. He'd turned off his phone hours ago. Not because he was hiding, because he was trying to remember who he was before all this began. Before tuxedos and flashing cameras, before fake bios and corporate posturing, before he'd let himself believe even for a moment that he could belong in a world built on power games and polished masks. He sat on a bench near the frozen edge of a pond, rubbing his palms together. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. He wasn't ashamed of where he came from, but he hated how easily people dismissed him because of it. A voice startled him. "You're not hard to find." He looked up. Clarice stood before him, wrapped in a long wool coat, her eyes soft but sharp. "I figured you'd be somewhere real," she said. "Somewhere quiet." Gabe exhaled, his voice low. "They tore into everything, didn't they?" "Yes," she said. "And I didn't stop them. Not fast enough." He shook his head. "This isn't on you. I disagree." She sat beside him, close enough for their arms to nearly touch. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clarice turned to him. "They want me to renounce you in front of the board, to say you were a mistake, a moment of weakness." Gabe didn't flinch. "And are you going to?" She paused. "I don't know what this is between us yet, but I know it isn't a mistake. and I'm done pretending it is." He looked at her. Really looked. "You'd give up everything for that." She smiled, small but fierce. "I think I'm starting to understand what everything actually means." Gabe stared out over the pond, heart pounding. "I can't promise I'll fit into your world, Clarice," he said. "But I can promise I'll never let you become someone you're not just to survive it." She reached for his hand, then firmly, not delicately, like a decision. "I don't need you to fit in, I just need you to stand with me." 30 minutes later, they entered the Monroe Holdings boardroom together. It was a room built to intimidate long mahogany table panoramic view of the skyline, 20 men and women in tailored suits, cold eyes. Douglas sat at the head, flanked by Henry Fields. Clarice stood at the opposite end, Gabe beside her. Her voice rang out clear, "You all asked for an explanation. Here it is. I chose Gabe Carter. I chose honesty. I chose a life where I don't have to check my integrity at the door." The room shifted uncomfortably. Douglas narrowed his eyes. "So you're willing to risk this company for what sentiment?" Clarice lifted her chin. "I'm not risking it. I'm reshaping it. If that means stepping down, so be it. But I won't lead with fear. Not anymore." She reached for Gabe's hand, and to her surprise he took it without hesitation. The silence that followed wasn't applause, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something rarer. Respect, even if it came reluctantly. Clarice hadn't known silence could be this loud. The elevator descended from the Monroe Holdings boardroom, its walls of polished brass reflecting the expression on her face, calm, composed, until you looked into her eyes. She stood with her back straight, her fingers still wrapped around Gabe's, though his grip had softened, unsure. The confrontation had gone better than expected. No dramatic firing, no instant scandal, but the fallout would come. Clarice knew how these people operated. Their retaliation never screamed. It whispered behind closed doors and withheld funding, stalled projects, and carefully worded memos. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Gabe pulled his hand away gently. She looked at him, startled. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer immediately. They walked out through the marble lobby side by side, his pace slower than usual. "Gabe," she asked again. Outside, a cold wind cut between the buildings. Gabe finally stopped beside a planter box dusted with snow. "I need to go back to Colorado." Clarice blinked. "What?" "Just for a few days," he said. "I talked to Annie this morning. Eli's been having a rough week. 2 coughing fits, 1 hospital visit." Her chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to fix it. He's my son." "Clarice." She nodded slowly. "I understand." "Of course. But this feels like more than just a check-in." He looked at her. "Really?" Looked. "It is." She felt it then, like something slipping between her fingers, unspoken and irreversible. "This world," he said, motioning to the skyscrapers around them, "was never meant for me. I can borrow the suit, learn the lingo, shake the hands, but it's not who I am. And I can't afford to lose myself trying to keep up." "But you didn't lose yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "You grounded me. You walked into my chaos and didn't run. You're the most real thing that's happened to me in years." He reached for her hand again, not with passion, but with the weight of someone making peace. "That's why I need to step away," he said, "because I don't want what we have to get poisoned by the pressure around it. Not now, not when it's just starting to be something true." Clarice swallowed. "So that's it. You're leaving. I'm choosing to show up for my son. And maybe to figure out what it means to show up for you, but in a way that doesn't make either of us smaller." She closed her eyes briefly, battling tears. "I wish you didn't have to go." He smiled faintly. "So do I." That night, Clarice wandered her penthouse alone. No Gabe making tea in the kitchen. No quiet humming while he folded towels or adjusted the thermostat. The silence was unfamiliar and unbearable. She sat on the couch and opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The front page of nearly every business site featured her name. Some articles praised her bold stand for independence while others questioned her emotional judgment and speculated about her future as CEO. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the hollow in her chest where Gabe's steadiness had been. She clicked open a browser and typed, "Flights to Colorado." Then she stopped. Not because she doubted her decision, but because this wasn't about chasing him. It was about becoming someone who wouldn't lose herself again just because someone else walked away. That was the real cost of love, not in losing control, but in choosing who you are when no one else is there to catch you. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, Gabe returned to a snow-covered world that felt both familiar and strange. Eli ran into his arms at the airport, clinging tightly. "Dad," the boy whispered, "I missed you every second." Gabe kissed his son's hair heart, swelling with something deeper than words. "Me too, bud. More than you know." Later, as they sat in their modest living room fireplace, crackling cartoons playing quietly in the background, Gabe realized how different everything looked now. The peeling wallpaper, the squeaky heater, the thrift store couch. None of it had changed. But he had. He was still a single dad. Still juggling bills, still watching over a boy with lungs too fragile for winter. But he wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way that mattered. Clarice's voice lived in his head like a melody he hadn't known he missed until it was gone. He thought about texting her. Then he didn't. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at his door. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note in Clarice's elegant script. "You once told me pain and motion aren't mutually exclusive. I'm learning that too. I've kept your mug in the cupboard, just in case you find your way back to it." Clarice taped to the bottom was a child's drawing, Eli's unmistakably with stick figures, Gabe Clarice, and a crooked heart between them. Gabe stared at it for a long time. He knew then that distance didn't diminish real things. It clarified them. On the 7th night, Gabe tucked Eli in, read him 2 chapters, and lingered at the bedroom door. Then he walked to the living room, picked up his phone, and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said softly. Gabe's voice broke through. "I want to come back. But not just for you." Clarice was silent for a beat. "Then why for us?" he said. "For what we are when we're not pretending." She exhaled a shaky breath. "Then, come home." And for the first time, Gabe realized she didn't mean New York. She meant wherever he stood with her beside him. The day Gabe returned to New York, the city was wrapped in one of those soft, unexpected March thaws where the air hinted at spring, but the sidewalks still clung to the last bite of winter. He stepped off the train with nothing but a small overnight bag and a folded drawing from Eli tucked into the front pocket of his coat. Clarice was waiting for him on the edge of the platform, not in her usual heels and coat of armor, but in a simple navy sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, no makeup. There was no press, no performance. Just her. He smiled before he could stop himself. She walked toward him and stopped a few steps away. "Hey, hey," he said, voice low and a little breathless. "Did you come to save me?" she asked, half playful, half vulnerable. He shook his head. "No. I came to walk beside you. That's all I ever really wanted." Her eyes filled, and before she could say anything, he reached out and gently took her hand. They didn't need to fill the silence. They were the silence. And the peace inside it. That evening, they sat together in the penthouse, no scripts between them. Gabe stood at the kitchen counter, stirring soup sleeves, rolled up a towel tossed over his shoulder. Clarice leaned against the doorframe, watching him like someone witnessing something sacred. "I missed this," she said quietly. He glanced up. "You missed my soup?" "No," she said, smiling. "I missed you. You're being here. Like this." He set the spoon down and walked toward her. "You know, you could have had any man in this city. Any man in this country, really. And you chose a guy who can fix your sink but struggles to fit in at a cocktail party." Clarice took his hand and placed it over her heart. "I didn't need someone who fit in. I needed someone who fit me." Gabe didn't respond with words. He stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms, holding her like she was the only thing that made sense in the world. It wasn't passionate or frenzied, it was certain. A certainty neither of them had felt in years. They stood there a long time, breathing together. Healing. The next day brought the fallout. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Clarice walked into the Monroe Holdings executive floor, Gabe at her side, not hidden behind her, but beside her, hand in hand. They weren't there to fight. They were there to claim something. Rosalind met them at the elevator, surprise flashing across her usually composed face. They're all in the boardroom. Clarice nodded. Good. So are we. Inside the room buzzed like a hive of restrained judgment. The board members glanced at each other, clearing throats, raising brows. Douglas Monroe sat at the head of the table, stone-faced. "Clarice," he said, folding his hands, "this isn't a social call. We have shareholders waiting for a resolution." Clarice placed a slim folder on the table. "This is a 5-year projection based on a strategy Gabe and I developed last night. We restructured 3 underperforming regions, divested from an inflated holding, and reallocated funds toward the sustainable housing initiative you keep postponing." The board members leaned in, suddenly attentive. Douglas blinked. "You did all that in one night," Gabe answered, calm and clear. "It's amazing what you can do when you're not trying to impress anyone. Just solve problems." Clarice met her father's eyes. "We're not here to ask for permission. We're here to offer leadership, the kind that doesn't compromise people for profit." Douglas said nothing. One of the older board members, a woman named Lillian, who'd been silently flipping through the document, spoke next. "This is good. Aggressive, but lean. And the returns are clean," Gabe said. "No shortcuts, just transparency and vision." The room shifted. It wasn't surrender, but it wasn't resistance either. Douglas looked at Clarice, and for the first time the sternness in his face softened. "You're not the same girl who sat at that table a year ago," he said. "No," Clarice replied. "I'm not, and I don't want to be." That night, after the boardroom dust had settled and the final email had been sent, Clarice and Gabe took a walk through Central Park. It was late, and the lamps cast golden puddles of light on the pavement. A breeze stirred her hair. He laced their fingers together, pulling her a little closer. "You didn't have to bring me back into that room," he said. "You could have stood on your own." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I could have, but I didn't want to." They stopped near the lake, the city lights shimmering in the rippling water. Clarice turned to him. "I spent most of my life believing I had to do everything alone. That love was a liability. That vulnerability was weakness. But then you showed up fixing a light bulb at 2 in the morning, like it was the most important job in the world." He smiled. "It kind of was." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I didn't just fall for you, Gabe. I learned from you. I became more myself because you didn't try to change me, you respected me. That was the miracle." Gabe's throat tightened. "And you saw through me when no one else even bothered to look." He took both her hands. "I know we're still building this, but I'm in. All the way, as long as you want me." Clarice looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I want you," she said. "For real. No more pretending." Then, under the city lights with no cameras, no scripts, no expectations, she kissed him. It was slow, deep, home. And somewhere between the past and the future, 2 people who were never supposed to fit finally did. The board's silence didn't last long. Within 24 hours of Clarice's presentation, the tide began to shift. Emails were exchanged, whispered meetings held. Some board members were cautiously impressed. Others saw her defiance as dangerous precedent. The shareholders were divided, and more than a few were asking uncomfortable questions about leadership stability. Still, Clarice walked through the storm with her chin high, Gabe never far from her side. But on the 3rd morning, a letter arrived. She opened it at the kitchen island, fingers trembling only slightly. Gabe watched her from across the room, his coffee untouched. Notice of Review Temporary Suspension of Executive Authority, pending emergency vote. Her breath caught. They were calling a vote, a formal challenge to her leadership. She blinked slowly, then set the paper down. Gabe stood and crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. Clarice. She shook her head. It's not unexpected, but it's still a punch. She managed a faint smile. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. He reached for her hand. You don't have to do this alone. I'm not, she said softly, and in that moment it was clear she'd been alone for so long, she'd forgotten how to accept support. And now that it was here solid and unwavering, it changed everything. The day of the vote arrived like a storm front. Clarice stood before the board in the same room that had tried to bury her identity more than once. She wore navy sharp and understated. No jewelry, no polish, only purpose. Douglas Monroe sat at the head of the table, gaze unreadable. Beside him, Henry Fields looked almost smug. He'd been waiting for this. A full shareholder quorum had been called. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the tension was thick enough to broadcast on its own. Clarice cleared her throat and stepped forward. No notes today, she began. I've given you all enough slides, spreadsheets, and forecasts to last a fiscal year. A ripple of chuckles, uneasy but real. She let the silence fall for a beat. I'm not going to stand here and justify my relationship or my choices. You've already decided what you think about those. But I will remind you of something. Leadership is not compliance. It's courage. It's seeing the people behind the profits. And for too long we've operated like those two things are separate. Her gaze swept the room. I've brought you growth. I've brought vision. And yes, I've brought discomfort. Because disruption often feels like rebellion until it becomes the new foundation. Someone in the back nodded. She turned to her father. Dad, you taught me to lead with clarity. You said, profit will follow conviction. Well, I'm giving you mine. And if you don't want it, if this board decides I'm not fit to lead, then I will step down. Not because I failed, but because I refuse to become someone I don't recognize just to stay. Then quietly she added, but if you believe in the company, I know we can become. Then let me build it. Without apology. A beat of silence followed. Then a low voice called the vote. One by one, hands raised. It was slow, deliberate, and breathtaking. In the end, it wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. She stayed. Clarice let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her eyes found Gabe through the glass wall waiting just outside. She didn't smile. Not yet. Not until the choice was hers again. That evening, she and Gabe walked the High Line as the sun dipped over the Hudson, bathing the city in gold. I didn't know if they'd keep me, she said, voice light but quiet. I did, Gabe replied. You walked in there like someone who wasn't afraid of losing. She looked at him. I was afraid. I still am. But I've spent so many years trying to be right, I forgot how it feels to be real. Gabe stopped and turned to face her. Clarice, what you did today, what you've been doing since that night in the resort lobby, it's not just bold, it's honest, and people are starving for that kind of leadership. She stared at him, her throat tight with something deeper than victory. You changed me. No, he said softly. You just finally had room to be who you already were. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small square box. He frowned. What's that? Clarice opened it. Inside was a ring, but not just any ring. A modest gold band, simple and elegant with a tiny engraving on the inside, the light was never broken. I don't know what this is yet, she said, holding his gaze. I don't know how we navigate two lives, two cities, a son, and a past that doesn't always feel distant. Gabe's eyes filled. But I do know this: I don't want to lead a company or a life without you in it. And I'm not asking you to propose. I'm asking you to choose this with me. As partners, as equals. Gabe took the box gently from her hands. Closed it. then leaned in and kissed her with all the quiet depth of a man who had learned the hard way that real love never shouts, it shows up. When he pulled back, he whispered, "You already know my answer." And the city, ever impatient, paused just long enough to witness it. Snow had returned to Pine Haven. The March wind had curled back into winter's breath, dusting the resort's pine-shaded roofs with a thin layer of white. Gabe stood outside the small tool shed near the rear maintenance entrance, holding a flashlight in one hand and a worn leather journal in the other. His name was still etched on the toolbox beside him, G. Carter, though someone else had likely used it since he left. He hadn't come back to reclaim anything. He came to make peace with the man he used to be. Clarice had insisted on joining him, but he'd asked for a day. Just one. Alone. To touch the world where he and Eli had built a life from quiet survival. Where grief had taken up residence in his bones, but where hope had slowly, stubbornly returned, one routine, one bedtime story, one repaired light at a time. He stepped into the old maintenance corridor and flipped the switch. Nothing. The lights once again were out. He laughed softly under his breath. Figures. Gabe grabbed a spare fuse, climbed the stepladder near the breaker box, and began the familiar ritual. Screwdriver. Check wiring. Replace. As he worked, memories flooded back of frigid night's tools freezing in his hands, of running to Eli's bedside in the middle of a shift, of moments where no one saw him but he showed up anyway. It hadn't been glamorous, but it had been real. And real was everything. By noon, he stepped back outside just as a black SUV pulled up along the snowy curb. The door opened and Clarice stepped out, her coat flaring in the wind like something from a dream. No makeup, no press, just her. She walked toward him with a smile that warmed even the bitter mountain air. "You fixed the lights?" she asked, glancing up at the softly glowing fixtures in the lodge windows. He nodded. "Still remember how?" She tilted her head. "You ever miss it?" He looked around then, back at her. Sometimes. Not the cold, not the hours, but the simplicity of it. You fix a thing and it stays fixed for a while. Clarice walked closer and slipped her arm through his. "Life's not like that, is it?" "No," he said, "but it's not broken either, just complicated." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out." Gabe smiled. "You say that like it's easy." "No, I say it like it's ours." That night, the entire town gathered for the winter community fundraiser at Pine Haven's event hall. Gabe had once fixed the stage lights for these events without anyone noticing. Now he stood in the crowd, a guest next to Clarice Monroe, who looked out of place only in title, not in heart. Eli held her hand like he'd done it 1,000 times. She bent down to whisper something in his ear, and the boy grinned, nodding toward the hot chocolate stand. She nodded back, watching him run off with 2 other kids from the lodge. Gabe turned to her. "You're good with him." "He's easy to love," she said softly. "So are you," he said, surprising her, and maybe himself. She didn't reply right away. Just stared at him, eyes filled with something weightier than words. "I used to think the only way to lead was to stay untouchable," she whispered. "Strong. Alone." And now he asked. "Now I know that strength isn't in solitude. It's in choosing the right people to let in and letting them stay." The hall lights dimmed as someone tapped the mic on stage. It was Douglas Monroe. Clarice straightened in surprise. "He's here." Gabe followed her gaze. Douglas took the podium, clearing his throat before addressing the crowd. "My daughter asked me not to make a speech," he began. "So, naturally, I'm making one anyway." Laughter. He smiled briefly. "I spent my life building an empire, believing that control and power were the cornerstones of leadership. But recently, I've watched someone I love lead with something I forgot existed: conviction without ego, compassion without apology." He looked directly at Clarice. "She reminded me that success isn't about how many people stand below you. It's about how many you lift beside you." The room was silent. Douglas continued. So tonight I want to thank the person who showed me that again. Not just my daughter, but the man who made her braver. Gabe blinked, stunned. Douglas stepped down from the stage and walked toward them. He stopped in front of Gabe and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for standing with her when I didn't know how." Gabe took the hand firm and steady. "I didn't stand for her. I just stood with her." Clarice watched them, eyes glistening. Later, under the stars outside the event hall, Clarice pulled Gabe aside. "This place," she said, breath curling in the night air. "It's where it all started, isn't it? The lobby lights. That ridiculous robe. My terrible timing." He smiled. "It was the best timing of my life." She laughed. "You always say the simplest things like they're profound, because sometimes they are." Clarice reached into her coat pocket again. Not a ring this time. "A key. To the place across from yours," she said. "I rented it. At least for a while." Gabe stared at her, surprised. "I want to learn this rhythm with you," she said. "Your world. Eli's world. Ours. I want to do the simple things, the hard things, the everyday things with you." He took the key gently, then pulled her into his arms. And for the first time everything felt exactly as it should be. Not perfect, but whole. Lights fixed, hearts open, together. The wedding wasn't grand. There were no marble halls, no designer gowns, no long guest list curated by assistants and corporate partners. Instead, there was a lake, half frozen, half glittering beneath the April sun, bordered by pines that swayed gently in the breeze. The air was crisp, clean, alive with the scent of melting snow and spring just beneath the surface. Clarice stood beneath an arch made of pine branches and white linen, her hair loosely braided down her back cheeks, flushed with more than just the cold. She wore a simple ivory dress that moved like wind and felt like peace. Eli, beaming in his little gray suit, adjusted the boutonniere on Gabe's lapel and whispered, "You look like a superhero." Gabe smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's only because of the cape under the shirt." Eli giggled, then ran to his spot beside Clarice, holding the small pillow that carried 2 silver rings. The guests were few. Rosalind holding a cup of cocoa and blinking back what she swore were just allergies. Douglas Monroe seated near the front, his pride silent but unmistakable. A few neighbors from Pine Haven, Clarice's old college roommate, a baker who had once let Eli taste cake samples just for fun. No press, no spectacle, just people who mattered. Just love. The officiant, a kind woman from town with a voice like warm tea, began the ceremony as Gabe and Clarice joined hands. "Today," she said, "we celebrate not only the bond between 2 people, but the choice they made to see each other not as perfect but as present. Not as polished, but as real. Love, at its core, is not built on performance. It's built on presence. And today, these 2 choose presence together." Clarice looked up at Gabe, her eyes bright. "I used to believe I had to do everything alone," she said softly. "That independence meant isolation. That power meant silence. But then you came into my life carrying a wrench and a kind word, and you taught me the most beautiful truth I've ever known. Strength isn't about who you stand above. It's about who you stand with." Her voice wavered, but she held steady. "You showed me how to be soft without breaking. You reminded me that love doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stay. I promise to choose you every ordinary day, to build something with you not because it's expected but because it's ours." Gabe swallowed, hard fingers gently tightening around hers. "I was a man who fixed things," he said, voice low but clear. "Pipes, lights, broken hinges. But when I met you, I realized something: I didn't need to fix you. I just needed to stand beside you while you rebuilt yourself." He took a breath, the wind catching in his chest. "You gave Eli a second home before you ever gave me a promise. And that told me everything I needed to know. I don't just love you, I respect you. I see you. And I will spend the rest of my life showing up for you. The way you've shown up for me." Tears slipped silently down Clarice's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She wanted to remember how it felt to be seen so completely. The rings were exchanged simple silver smooth. No diamonds, no fuss. Just symbols of something far more rare than glamour. Commitment. The real kind. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer erupted from the small crowd. Eli ran up and wrapped both arms around their waists, burying his face between them. "You're really married now?" he asked, eyes wide. Gabe knelt to his level. "Yeah, buddy, we really are." Eli turned to Clarice. "Does that mean you're my mom now?" Clarice crouched, cupping his cheeks in her hands. "If you'll have me." He nodded solemnly. "I already did." She kissed his forehead, and Gabe watched them, heart full to the brim. That night they returned to the same resort lobby where it all began. The lights, yes, those lobby lights now glowed steadily overhead, casting a warm, amber hue across the wooden floors and velvet chairs. Gabe had rewired them himself the week before, not because they were broken, because he wanted them to shine brighter than ever. Clarice stood by the fireplace wearing a thick sweater and wool socks, her wedding dress long since traded for comfort. Gabe approached with 2 mugs of cocoa. "I was thinking," she said, "taking hers, we should come here every year. Same day. Just us, even when it's snowing sideways. Especially then," she said, smiling. "Because if we can make it through a storm, we can make it through anything." He touched her cheek. "We already have." They sat by the fire, their hands intertwined. Eli snoring softly on a couch nearby, his sketchbook still open across his chest. Today's page filled with a stick-figure family now drawn with a house, and a glowing street lamp above it. Gabe looked at Clarice, heart thudding gently in his chest. "You ever think," he whispered, "how close we came to missing each other?" She turned to him, eyes soft. "No. I think about how lucky we were to notice." The fire crackled beside them. Outside, snow fell like confetti. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, the kind that never makes headlines but builds a life they didn't need anything more. Because the lights were on, the hearts were full, and the future, it was theirs. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Let us know in the comments below, and if this story moved you, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment to pause and reflect, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories just like this one. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means the world to us. See you in the next story.